Hi there! So this is my fourth video in my series on sexism in video gaming, and in response to some feedback, I'm changing up the format a little bit. For one thing, as you can see, I'm actually getting here in front of the camera so you can see my brave face, or whatever this is. I figure that by doing that, it might encourage a little more engagement, because I really do want to hear what you have to say. I read the comments, I can't read everything, but I appreciate the feedback I get, and when I make a mistake, feel free to call me out. I appreciate it. One of my personal mottos in life is that to recognize that you are wrong is to have learned something. When you see that I've made a mistake, let me know. I'll try and add an annotation to correct it. I do appreciate it. I'd also like to say, that I'm not going to close down my comments or the feedback. I'm not going to be like some of those other YouTube channels that are out there. You know what I mean. Also, as you can see, I'm wearing my Rush shirt here, and then a blazer over the top of that. Figure it might help me look a little bit more respectable or something. Are you buying it?
All right. It's Saturday night. I have no date, a 2-liter bottle of Shasta, and my all-Rush mixtape. Let's rock.
So let's talk Gamergate. Now, as a developer, I suspect that I may have a little different perspective on how all that went down. I guess if you're looking for a soundbite, though, I would say that I'm generally supportive of Gamergate as I understand it. But that being said, it's actually a pretty complex issue. So let's get into that for a bit. So the first thing I want to say is that I think the way this all blew up was really way overdue. I really think that this was an issue between the press and the consumers. Although I think in order to understand that, first we kind of have to discuss how the press and the game industry and consumers all kind of fit together. On the one hand, you've got the game makers. This would include your developers and your publishing houses. And then on the other side, you've got your game players or your game consumers. And then the press is supposed to be kind of the liaison between these two groups. Okay, so if we dig in just a little bit more on the game maker side, you've got the development studio itself, and the development studios is what we always think of with the programmers, producers, the designers, the artists, and they're the guys who actually make the game, and they test the game, and they spend all those long hours making it as good as possible. But then you've got the publishing house, and the publisher is the organization that fronts the money. They're the ones who invest. They're the ones who have a stake in whatever the development team is building doing well, so they can get a return on that investment. The publishers are so concerned about getting their money back that they have a special team, all the big publishing houses do, that's the PR team. And the PR team's job is to interface between the publishers and the developers and the press. The PR team is so concerned with making sure that the press gets a favorable sense or a favorable impression of whatever the developers are doing, that they treat the press with tremendous reverence. They go to great lengths to make sure that the press is happy, that they think good about the game. And I've seen this a lot in my 20 plus years of game development. Your PR team will set up these grand events, and they'll invite all sorts of various press outlets to come and attend. And then they'll try and make them feel really good. They'll give them gifts, they'll give them food. I actually remember a case where the press team flew out a bunch of journalists to Salt Lake City, Utah, and to talk about a game that we were about to launch at the time. I think it was Critical Depth. I'm not really sure. It was back when I was at Single Track. But they not only did they just treat them like royalty, but they actually took them up on ski slopes, and they gave them big dinner up at Park City. This sort of thing happens all the time. It's par for the course. Another aspect of how the PR team works is that they're very careful to contain and control what the developers say to the press. Whenever we have an event, the PR team always first coaches us. They give us talking points. They have us review. They have us practice to make sure that developers don't say anything that might jeopardize the publisher's investment. Makes a lot of sense. I think they serve a very important and a very necessary role. But if you stop to think about it, if you're on the press side, it starts to go to your head a little bit after a while, right? After a while, you start to realize, hey, you can make or break a game based on what you say about it. You know, your review becomes really important. The press, in my opinion, back in 2014 when Gamergate started out, the press was really feeling pretty full of themselves. They were having tremendous success with an industry that was booming and growing and doing very, very well. They had websites that were getting, you know, millions of hits, and consumers were kind of hanging on their every word. The press was really situated in this position of being, I don't know if this is quite right, but almost like lords of the industry. The press was really, really revered. They were revered by the developers, they were revered by the publishing houses, and at that time I think they were very much revered by the consumers as well. That's the context of how I perceive things were set up back in August of 2014 when Gamergate really gets started. There was a guy named Aaron Gioni, I think that's how you say his name, who wrote a post called the Zoe Post, where he basically exposed his dirty laundry about this very turbulent relationship that he was having with an independent developer named Zoe Quinn, who was at that time most famous, I think, for having produced a game called Depression Quest, which is great. You know, indie development is really, really difficult. A lot of people maybe did like Depression Quest, but that's really not the point. Aaron made allegations that Zoe Quinn had kind of amped up the signal on her particular game through some relationships within the press, that she may have actually slept with the reporter to try and get some additional press coverage. The reporter's name was Nathan Grayson. Now, I don't know if those allegations are true, and to be honest, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think that sort of thing kind of happens. Aaron's post is a very sympathetic post. I've read it, and so there started to be this kind of this little buzz, right? This corner of the internet started to pay attention to this. Okay, so then over the course of the next 2 weeks, this group that I think was talking mostly about the Zoe Quinn issue started to call out some other people. You know, they called out Phil Fish, who I think came to Zoe Quinn's defense. There was something in there about the Fine Young Capitalists. On the development side, you know, with the big publishing houses, honestly, we're not paying too much attention, but I like to make an analogy. I like to say it's kind of like the gaming industry at that time was like this big cafeteria, right? It's like a high school cafeteria, and everybody's in there, say, having lunch. Off in the corner, you start to have these group of kids who are like kind of arguing back and forth, and they're calling out, you know, the Zoe Quinn as having been, you know, in collusion with the press. And so then at another table, maybe a little bit away, you've got this table of press guys. And these press guys see themselves as the cool kids, right? They're the ones who set the tone for the school. They see themselves as like, hey, we're kind of in charge of the school. We're really awesome here. So they start hearing some of this stuff going on in the corner, and some of them are like, man, they're really being mean to Zoe over there, and that seems unfair. But they're also kind of pointing the finger at us every now and then and calling us out. You know, we really don't like that. We really feel like, hey, we're better than that little corner of kids over there. And I think that they were looking down on that you know, clique of kids. This table of cool kids, the press table, starts to talk among themselves a little bit. We're more enlightened as press guys than those kids over at that table. We're socially conscious. We need to let everyone in the cafeteria know that we're better than this. We need to virtue signal, you know, our position on this issue going on in this corner of the cafeteria. This is when Gamergate really kicks off. About 10 articles dropped on the exact same day, August 28th, 2014, from these press outlets, and they all basically said the same thing. They all said that people who identify as gamers are somehow now bad people. Oh, and by gamers, they meant specifically young men like those guys in the corner who are playing games. Now to me, this is just astounding. It's kind of mind-blowing, the degree of arrogance that I feel the people at the cool kids table at the press group that wrote these articles had at that time. Here's how I like to think about it. You know, so they see this stuff going on over in the corner, and rather than kind of calling out those guys specifically, or rather than even trying to start a discussion with the other kids in the cafeteria, the rest of the gaming industry, about what this may mean, They stand up from their table, get up on top of the table, turn around, look out at everybody else who's in there and says, hey, you see what's going on at this table over here? This is all of your fault. Everybody else in here is to blame if you in any way are like some of those guys at that table. Gamergate was really a creation of the press. It was a reaction to the press. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about how ridiculous it was to approach what was really kind of a small scandal in this manner. Can you imagine if a similar scandal had happened in a different industry? Like suppose it was, the music industry, a lot of guys in that industry. Suppose there was kind of a scandal going on about, some woman maybe have gotten special treatment or something. And then one day all the press outlets came out together and said, rockers are dead. All those rockers, man, they're bad because look what they've created. They've created this hostile environment for women in rock and roll. Saying gamers don't have to be your audience regarding video games is like an automotive writer saying drivers don't have to be your customers. Of course they do, because they're your core market. It's just ridiculous, right? It's out of control. To continue that cafeteria metaphor, it's kind of like those guys stood up and they yelled, "Food fight!" and started throwing the first meatballs at people who weren't otherwise even engaged in this, and probably they might have overheard it, but they didn't really care. Gamergate, in my opinion, was started by the press's arrogance. Why did it turn into this big social phenomenon? And there have been a lot of explanations thrown out there, but I think any explanation that we're going to accept needs to account for all of the evidence and not just a small subset of it. Now, of course, there was the standard press explanation that then got picked up by CBS News, and also what, like Anita said on the Colbert Report, that it was just a reaction by, angry male gamers to the influx of women coming into the industry and critiquing things. And there was probably a little bit of that, but it's not the full story, and I think anybody who's paid attention knows that it's not the full story. But the press really played on that for quite a while. And I think the reason they did is that they trafficked in victimization, right? Anytime that they could find a victim, it played into that narrative that they wanted to have, which is to blame all gamers, anybody who considered themselves a gamer, for the problems that they were seeing in the industry. But they left out a big chunk of evidence when they were doing that, because there were men and women of all races and classes and affectations on both sides of this issue. And the press was mostly playing, just the one side. My explanation for what happened here is that Gamergate was a consumer-led revolt against the religion of identity politics. Now, I think the word religion is the right word here. Because there's kind of a central dogma in identity politics, and that is that you are defined not by your behavior, not by your character, but rather by your demographic identifiers. For example, you start with your sex, whether you're male or you're female, then you move on to your race, whether you're white or you're black or Asian or Indian or whatever that might be, and then your sexual orientation, gay, straight, bi, and so forth. And this is supposed to be your political group. It's how you're supposed to be identified. And then the religion of identity politics goes on to say that the more rare your particular instances of demographics are, the more oppressed you are, and hence, the more righteousness within the religion you can assume. Conversely, the more commonplace are your demographics, the more oppressive you are, and hence the more evil secretly resides in your very existence. To me, this is very much like original sin. If you just happen to be born into a majority position within that religion of identity politics, you are automatically sinful, right? Your behavior doesn't really matter. That's what they mean by privilege. It's your position. You're just born into it. Note that this is the exact opposite of Martin Luther King Jr.'s plea that people should be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now, also within the religion, the only way that you can really be redeemed is to accept your inherent sinful nature as an oppressor, right, to whatever degree that is, and you confess your demographic markers, right? You say, oh, I'm sorry I'm white, I'm sorry I'm male, I'm sorry I'm straight, and then you promise You promise to do better. You promise to have a change of heart, right? And you'll strive to overcome your inherently sinful ways. And you do that by denigrating yourself, putting yourself down, and then elevating others who might be in a more oppressed state. Doesn't matter if you're a good person. Within the religion of identity politics, it's purely your demographic.
You're a white male!
So?
You're a white man!
Go back and look at those articles that all dropped on the same day of August 28th. And you can see that pretty clearly they're evangelizing this religion of identity politics. And they're saying this is the solution to the scandal that we see over here. The authors, those press people, were kind of like priests and priestesses of identity. No, I reject your religion. I reject what you're saying about me. And I'm going to push back. I'm going to fight back against anybody who says I have to suddenly buy into your religion in order to be a good person. To me, that's what Gamergate was all about and what it continues to be about. It's a rejection of the religion of identity politics. So what now? Well, on the one side, I think that the press, the mainstream press, has lost a lot of their influence over the gaming industry, especially over what consumers think. They don't trust them like they used to before. A lot of members of Gamergate have said, hey, we don't even want to deal with these guys anymore. The consumer revolt was very successful. They voted with their dollars, and press outlets that used to cover gaming have really folded in. Of course, they're playing the victim too. They're like, oh, these gamers, they're just so mean to us, right? A lot of those guys. But not everybody in the press. A lot of people in the press started to recognize, hey, you know, attacking our core demographic, it's pretty damn stupid. We should maybe try and be more inclusive and talk about, you know, gaming industry as it actually is, which is, you know, this big tent where everybody's got space and everybody has a role to fill, and back away from the religion of identity politics. I think, you know, some press outlets have figured that out. But even more importantly, and to me, the beautiful thing that's come out of Gamergate is that all these consumers went looking for their information from other sources. They started looking to, you know, other gamers for their reviews. They started looking to, you know, guys like, you know, Boogie2988 or Total Biscuit to find out what was really going on. And I think that's great, because I think the relationship between developers and consumers should be as transparent as possible. Is great. It's good for our industry. I think that was fantastic. And then I mentioned earlier this, what's her name, Liana Kersner, who I actually found that I really respect. I didn't even know about her prior to the Gamergate thing. And then she wrote a 5-part essay that she then recorded on YouTube. I'll link to it in the comments, where she talked about how Anita Sarkeesian almost made her quit writing about games. And it's very insightful because Liana considers herself a feminist, right? But she says, you know, Anita is pushing this feminist ideology that she doesn't agree with. In particular, Anita is pushing kind of a sex-negative approach to feminism, which says, you know, women who are attractive are automatically bad in some way, that there's something morally lesser about those women. And because Liana has done these, you know, cosplay sorts of things, well, then she must be part of the bad group. Anyway, you know, I personally find myself, kind of a side note, sometimes people will say, well, how do you feel about feminism? And it reminds me of the question that Carl Sagan used to get asked. You know, they said, well, Carl, Dr. Sagan, how do you feel about God? And his response was always, well, what do you mean by God? And that's kind of how I feel when somebody says, well, are you a feminist? I always want to say, well, what do you mean by feminism? Because that dictionary definition that comes forward, you know, that, oh, well, we just want equal rights between men and women. Well, then, yeah, of course I'm in support of that. It's what Dr. Summers would call equity feminism. But then there's that brand of feminism that Dr. Summers calls gender feminism, and what for a while I was calling victim feminism, which sees the world in terms of a, you know, a grand conspiracy of a patriarchy, that everywhere you look, you have to look through this filter of how is this bad for women, and that identity politics plays this big role on your demographic is the key thing. That I completely reject. So at the end here, and I want to wrap this up. It's probably gone on too long. First of all, I would love to know what you think of this different format, rather than me making kind of a series of slides and videos that I just kind of talk to you. Is this better? Is it more engaging for you? And should I continue to do that in the future? Plan on doing more of this, which I would love to hear from you. If you've got like things within the game industry that you'd like me to comment on, or you want to hear more of my stories or experiences or that sort of stuff, or if you just want advice from me on how I think you can get into the gaming industry or what it's really like, love to talk about any of that. Please just let me know. I'm looking, to open up this dialogue. Now that I'm not working in development, I feel like I can say whatever I want. Let me know what you guys think, and until we meet again, game on!